Hello, this presentation is presented by SENDIASS. We provide free, confidential and impartial information, advice and support relating to special education and disability independently from education, health and care providers. I'll take you through the slides one by one. There is a lot of information on there, and if you have any further questions, contact details are at the end. This presentation is about exclusion from school and part-time timetables. As I say, there's SENDIASS and some more information about exactly who we are. Exclusions. In educational settings, it is where a child or young person is no longer allowed to attend that setting for a specific period of time. But we'll go on to talk about it in more detail. What are the types of exclusion? There are only two types of exclusion which are lawful. For a fixed term exclusion, for a period of time, or a permanent exclusion, which as the name suggests, where the young person or child is basically permanently excluded from that establishment. It's important to remember as well, informal or unofficial exclusions, such as sending pupils home to cool off, are unlawful regardless of whether they occur with the agreement of parents or carers. So send and exclusions. Exclusion rates for certain groups of children are consistently higher than average. These groups do include people and children with SEN. So schools must ensure that their policies and practices do not discriminate against pupils unfairly, increasing their risk of exclusion. It is unlawful to exclude pupils simply because the school are unable to meet the child's additional needs or a disability. And multiple fixed-term exclusions and informal exclusions may in fact be evidence of discrimination. So when can a child be excluded? A child can only be excluded on disciplinary grounds. Only the head teacher or the principal has the power to exclude. Their decision must be lawful, rational, reasonable, fair and proportionate. But what should a head teacher consider? Well, contributing factors that led to the exclusion. Early intervention. Did they know there was a problem? What was done? Effectiveness. Have there been short-term exclusions? Does there need to be short-term exclusions? What support is in place? And if the child has an education, health and care plan, the school should consider requesting an early annual review. Or use of a multi-agency assessment for pupils demonstrating persistent disruptive behaviour. And what that basically means is, if there is evidence of issues and problems, then the head teacher needs to look and see what's been done, what could have been done, what should have been done, what has been done. And of course, whether appropriate provision is in place to meet the pupil's special educational needs or their disability. So what's the procedure for exclusion? When a pupil is excluded, the parent should be notified immediately and be told whether the exclusion is permanent, where the exclusion is fixed term, the period of exclusion, the reasons for the exclusion, the parent's right to make representations to the governing body, and what day education will be provided from. So when can a child be permanently excluded? A decision to exclude a pupil permanently should only be taken in response to a serious breach or persistent breaches of the school's behaviour policy, and where allowing the pupil to remain in school would seriously harm the educational welfare of the pupil or others in the school. So it's quite a high bar that the head teacher would have to prove. So if the child or young person has been excluded and you appeal, we'll go to the governing body. And the following parties must be invited to a meeting of the governing body and allowed to make representations: the parents, the head teacher, and a representative of the local authority. The governing body must ask for any written evidence in advance of the meeting, including witness statements and other relevant information held by the school, such as those relating to a pupil's special educational needs. They circulate any written evidence and information, including a list of those who will be present, to all parties at least 5 school days in advance of the meeting. And this will allow parents and pupils to be accompanied by a friend or representative. And they should identify the steps they will take to encourage the excluded pupil to attend the meeting if they so wish. After the meeting, if the governing body uphold the permanent exclusion, parents then have a right to request that their decision is reviewed by an independent review panel. And for this, parents must lodge their application for a review within 15 school days of the notice being given to the parents by the governing body of the decision to uphold the permanent exclusion. Or, where an application has not been made within this time frame, within 15 school days of the final determination of a claim of discrimination under the Equality Act 2010. These are strict deadlines, and any application made outside of the legal time frame must be rejected by the local authority or the academy. Parents may request an independent review panel even if they did not make a case to or attend the meeting at which the governing body considered the exclusion. So in effect, if you're looking at exclusion, there's 2 panels there. So you've got the governing body in the first instance. If they uphold the school's decision, you can then go on to the independent review panel, which in effect is a very similar meeting to the first meeting, although everybody connected with the independent review panel is independent of the school. So if you're making an if you're making an application for review by the independent review panel, you must make written representations and, if applicable, supporting evidence when lodging their application. So new evidence can be submitted to the independent review panel. However, when deciding whether to quash the decision, the panel should only take account of evidence available to the governing body at the time of making its decision not to reinstate. The panel is able to take account of evidence that they consider would or should have been available to the governing body, and that the governing body ought to have considered it if they had been acting reasonably. So the role of the independent review panel is to review the governing body's decision not to reinstate a permanently excluded pupil. In reviewing the decision, the panel must consider the interests and circumstances of the excluded pupil, including the circumstances in which the pupil was excluded, and have regard to the interests of other pupils and people working at the school. So what can they decide? Well, the panel can decide to uphold the exclusion decision, recommend that the governing body reconsiders their decision, or to quash this decision and direct that the governing body considers the exclusion again. There is another way to appeal a decision, but this is only in certain circumstances. You can appeal to the SENDIASS tribunal. So an appeal may be made to SENDIASS following a fixed term or permanent exclusion if the reason relied on by the parent is that the exclusion was an act of discrimination arising from the child's disability. And the tribunal has a fast track for these cases, as it can order reinstatement. So this is in effect different, and there are different powers from SENDIASS and the governors. Part-time timetables. What is a part-time timetable? A part-time or reduced timetable means that the number of hours spent in education are reduced for a limited time period. And when can a part-time timetable be used? A reduced timetable cannot be implemented without an assessment that it will benefit the pupil, written agreement from a parent or carer, and an interim review for those with an education, health and care plan. So there is a procedure, and there are certain things that have to happen before the part-time timetable can be put in place. So why might a part-time timetable be used? So reintegration for pupils. They've been out of school for a while, for whatever reason. Part of an in-school support package to support somebody in school. Medical reasons, again, they could have been out of school, they could be coming back into school and need to come back, as I say, on a part-time timetable. But Southampton City Council in particular does not consider a reduced timetable is an appropriate method of managing poor behaviour. And if a parent refuses to agree to a reduced timetable for a full-time timetable should remain in place. So if a parent refuses to agree to a reduced timetable, a full timetable should remain in place. So when could you consider a part-time timetable? A risk assessment must be carried out prior to the introduction of a part-time timetable. All professionals working with a pupil should be consulted when a reduced timetable is being considered. Schools should ensure that there is a named member of staff responsible for monitoring each reduced timetable, and a reduced timetable cannot be treated as a long-term solution. So what we're looking at there is, what are the reasons for it? What are we looking to achieve? How long is it going to be in place? So all of these things need to be considered. So how long should a part-time timetable last for? A reduced timetable should be submitted with a support plan, such as an individual education plan, with clearly defined objectives and targets. So a reduced timetable should be agreed for no longer than 6 weeks, and it should be reviewed regularly at the end of the 6 weeks. The plan should show how the pupil will return to full-time hours. Now, quite obviously, it sometimes will take longer than 6 weeks, but it's got to be reviewed regularly. There has to be proper reviews. What are you aiming to do within that period? How has it gone? What do we need to change, etc. Now, there's lots and lots of legislation and guidance, and there's details here should you want to look at those. School discipline, full-time education for excluded pupils, etc. Again, there's further information on legislation and guidance. Well, thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. If you'd like to contact us and ask further questions, please do. There is a lot of information on part-time timetables and exclusions online, and I'm sure it does generate a lot of questions, so please do get in touch. And I hope you found this short presentation useful.